Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation because we have several questions that we want to get to our panelists. So good morning, everybody. My name is Andrea Carlise. I'm the Executive Director of the International Action Network for Gender Equity and Law, coming to you from sunny California. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are located. We're going to start our panel discussion focusing on how to use global legal networks to advance equality in a few minutes, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about IAngel before we start our discussion today. So I'm going to share some slides with you.
Certainly.
So the International Action Network for Gender Equity and Law goes by the name IAngel, or the acronym IAngel. IAngels Mission is to use our international network of lawyers and activists to advance gender equity and protect the human and civil rights of women and girls through peaceful legal means. We advance our mission by connecting the lawyers and legal associations willing to donate their skills and energy to the activists and organizations working to promote gender equity nationally and throughout the world. At IAngel, we believe that the individuals and organizations working to protect women's rights, to confront gender bias, and to reform legal and cultural barriers to the full and equal participation of women in society should not want for resources. We believe that connecting volunteer lawyers to the cause of gender equity will build a stronger movement for justice worldwide. And we believe in a world where all people have the same rights to basic human dignity, fairness, and self-determination. We execute our mission through education, advocacy, and pro bono engagement in our three focus areas of reproductive justice, peace and security, and women and girls empowerment. Since 2013, we've been building our network and promoting engagement. As you can see on this slide, our network has donated over 9,000 volunteer hours towards more than 50 individual projects and engagements, and we've taken more than 50 individual advocacy actions globally. I'm going to tell you a bit about three of our current projects. Our Girls' Rights Project is pursuing new research concerning laws and regulations on child marriage, reproductive justice, and female genital mutilation in 3 different geographic regions. Natalia is going to tell you more about this during our panel. Our Teen Information Project on reproductive rights is a curriculum that we're developing in partnership with the local Bay Area Women's Bar Association to teach middle and high school age students about their sexual and reproductive health and rights, while inspiring the next generation of activists. IAngel is also offering human trafficking trainings to provide post-conviction and immigration relief for human trafficking survivors. Once trained, pro bono attorneys can immediately begin supporting clients in records clearance and T visa proceedings. An example of an education program we recently presented was to protect survivors during COVID-19. During this webinar, attendees received instruction about trauma-informed legal representation and the impacts of COVID-19 on domestic violence, sexual assault, and trafficking survivors. Finally, IAngel engages in advocacy for gender justice. As an example of our recent advocacy, we signed on to a letter calling on the US to protect and increase investments globally for gender equality-related programs, including those aimed at ending gender-based violence, improving women's economic empowerment, engaging in the peace and security agenda, and adolescent girls' empowerment. Now it is my pleasure to introduce you to our esteemed panelists. You can find their full bios on our event page on the virtual platform. But since we'd like to get to the substance of our discussion, I'll just tell you their names and organizational affiliations. Stella Odife is a Nigerian barrister who handles corporate finance matters. She has authored 2 books on gender equity issues and co-founded the Women's Organization for Gender Issues, or WOGI, a United Nations NGO in Lagos. Stella is a former IAngel board member, and she currently serves on our advisory board. Nancy J. Newman is a partner at Hanson Bridget LLP in San Francisco, where she specializes in real estate and commercial litigation. Nancy is a past president of Queen's Bench, a San Francisco Bay Area Women's Bar Association, and of the National Conference of Women's Bar Associations in the US. She is also the founder and the current president of IAngels Board of Directors. Shruti Rana is assistant dean and a professor at the Hamilton Lugar School of Global and International Studies at Indiana University, Bloomington, focusing on international law practice and human rights law. She's also the director of the International Law and Institutions Degree Program, and she formerly served as a director on IAngels Board. Natalia Ursola Gutierrez is a Colombian lawyer and a recent LLM graduate from the University of California at Berkeley. Natalia is working as a postgraduate legal intern for IAngel. She's currently working on our Girls' Rights Project, and she's serving as a liaison to the Berkeley law students who are conducting research for this project. Lisette Robleta de Haworth is the International Programs Manager at the Law Society of England and Wales, where she is responsible for the Society's international public interest work in the areas of legal development assistance, the rule of law, gender equality, anti-corruption, and human rights. Lisette also currently serves as a director on IAngels Board. So welcome to all of you panelists. This first question, so we can go ahead and get right into our presentation. The first question to the panel, which each of you will get to respond to, is what are some key human rights challenges to achieving gender equality or women and girls empowerment in your country or that your organization has worked on? Stella, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Thank you very much, Andrea. And thank you, IAngel, for this privilege to showcase WOGI again. Like every other African developing country, our problem, the challenges we found in our organization is rooted in our culture, the cultural setting from the beginning. And it goes on to the highest level. Despite the laws we have in the system, we have our constitution that says no discrimination, which is found on our fundamental right principles. We also have the child's right law. We also have violence against women law. That's in the system. But the cultural barrier still makes it difficult for us to actually achieve reasonable progress as far as gender equality is concerned. Take, for example, there's no discrimination, but we found out in some of the cases we have handled, women are still deprived of sharing in their father's property, inheritance rights. Even where Supreme Court has decided that Supreme Court is the final court of the land, it has decided that girls should have equal rights in their father's property. You still find it difficult to implement that in our society. The reason is the people in the rural setting are not aware of what we are talking about. And most of them are so scared of mentioning, the victims. The victims are not willing to go to court because in communities, they see going to court as the final straw. And so they don't want to be stigmatized or ostracized, even by family members, for trying to get what is their right, for trying to do what the law says they should do. Then we have the Child's Rights Act, which is also a very boost for gender equality, because now education is for both male and female. Unlike before, under a cultural setting, male took precedence on education before girls, but now they're on equal footing. So we believe that in the next 10 to 20 years, the current women we are going to have will not be as docile as the ones we have now, because from the foundation, they will have more educated women in the system. So the cultural barrier is still playing a major role, despite the law that is in the system. But another problem we encounter that is very painful is, despite the laws, the Child's Rights Act, the we call it Violence Against Women, VAPP, most of the states in the northern part of Nigeria have not domesticated it. That means there are no laws in their system. What it means is that they're still applying their cultural and religious law in those areas. And what it means is that NGOs like us are seen as meddling in their culture and religion. Under their culture, they can marry a minor. The Child's Rights Act says 18 years, but in the North, they can still marry any girl from age 12. By right, it should be challenged. But when they have not domesticated the law, you can't even challenge it. Also, in violence against women, physical violence, even rape. When they rape their wives, you can't even challenge them, because in their own law, which is their cultural and religious law, they call it chastisement and they call it family affair. And so you can't get in. These are the big barriers we have when we are talking about gender equality in the system. At the workplaces, the male workers are still finding it difficult to allow women to be their leader. Thanks to IAngel, the collaborative effort you people gave us was a big boost for one major achievement we made this year, where a consultant physician, a female doctor, was put to head a department. And by right, by qualification, you know that in law, we go by ranking, by age at the back. The same thing goes with the medical field. This woman was the right person to be on the board. But because she's a woman, they went and got a male. And when we challenged them, they now took us, there was a hearing at the Senate. We went to the Senate, and the Senate now invited the civil servant, who must have been biased or biased from the beginning, to say that there is no more by education, by qualification. It is now by length of service. So what it means is that a male doctor is placed under a consultant physician. So these are simple issues you see. You know definitely well that we have a huge problem in our hands. Maybe Nancy could take off from there. And
thank you, Stella. And thank you, Andrea, for setting up this amazing panel. And I want to say how delighted and thrilled I am to be on a panel with so many wonderful feminist lawyers. You are all remarkable and you inspire me. So it's wonderful to be here. The question of key human rights challenges for women and girls and empowerment is a broad one. And in one sense, we can talk about individual issues, child marriage, gender-based violence, in exclusion from leadership roles, or the inability to have access to reproductive health care or decision-making. Each of those is a key issue. I know there are many NGOs working on the individual issues, and we do as well. Those challenges are exacerbated by widespread poverty, displacement of people as a result of violence, political violence, rise of authoritarianism, as well as climate change and COVID-19, all very serious challenges. I think in the broader sense, if we look at a higher level, we face really two key challenges. First, as Stella noted, the movement faces a powerful web of discriminatory laws, practices, cultural barriers that continue to subjugate women and girls and deprive them of personal autonomy and prevent them from realizing the full benefits of civil society. And second is the internal challenge that we as activists face of unifying ourselves and harnessing and effectively deploying the power that we have, the power of so many bright, compassionate people who believe in equality to continue the work to effect lasting social change. I think part of that challenge is really maintaining focus and perspective in the face of inevitable retrenchment, and disappointments. We've seen a lot of that in recent years. I have been an activist my whole life. I am convinced that the overwhelming majority of people in this world are good people. People want to live in peace. They want to have food on their table. They want to have education for their children. They want to have the freedom to make their own decisions. But terrible injustice persists because a very powerful, well-organized minority of people is well-financed, and they have a vested interest in preserving the status quo. And at the same time, there are so many people who care about equality, but they are not actively engaged in doing the work to build that society they want to see. They don't know how to get involved, or they fight with each other instead of finding common ground to increase their effectiveness. So to me, the best way to meet those challenges is for us to connect with each other, support each other, learn from each other, inspire each other. Those efforts are really key to maintaining and strengthening our collective efforts to dismantle the systemic inequality that plagues the world. This discussion right now, and really the CSW as a whole, are excellent examples of the efforts that we need to do that. So Shruti, what do you think?
Well, thank you so much, Nancy, and thank you to IAngel and Andrea for organizing the panel. So what I wanted to talk about today is give you some of my perspectives from the field of legal education, because I think a lot of this, what's happening now, has been left out of the debate and relates quite specifically to the theme of this year's CSW, focusing on women's full and effective participation in decision-making in public life. So from my vantage point, we can see the beginnings of the long-term impact of the pandemic on the legal field, which we believe will reshape the landscape of the law and have immeasurable effects going forward. So just as the backdrop, going into the pandemic, we knew that the past 3 decades of progress for women, basically everything from the Beijing Declaration onwards, was at risk due to the populist and authoritarian threats to the human rights system and the speed with which human rights laws and laws addressing women's rights were being rolled back worldwide. So we saw, for example, in the United States, the Violence Against Women Act fell out of force, has not been renewed as of right this moment. Places as far away as Russia, domestic violence was decriminalized in 2017. Throughout Europe, you see great opposition to the Istanbul Convention. You see similar things happening in Latin America and elsewhere. So the pandemic hit just as the legal system for women's human rights was at its weakest. And in a lot of ways, it seems like it's really completing the job by rolling back the gains that were made in practice in women's actual participation in public life, as well as in the law. So we all know about the dramatic increases in domestic violence over the past year of the pandemic. All around the world, we know that women are being pushed out of the workforce en masse, again, all around the world. And now we see what it means that women really form the safety net in every country, right? Because when push comes to shove, it's women who are losing their jobs, it's women who are losing their access to justice, it's women who are losing access to the courts and legal services. So I've been researching the COVID care crisis and its impact on the legal field and academia. And what we're seeing here is the same thing that we are seeing elsewhere, which is that the last several decades of progress are at real risk of being lost. By 2019, the number of women lawyers and professors had reached new heights, and real change was beginning to happen all around the legal profession in the United States and elsewhere. But in just a matter of months, as schools and workplaces closed, women started dropping out of both academia and the legal field in general because of the new caregiving burdens that they had. So what we are seeing now is that one of the most critical things that happen at universities, two things. One is the production of knowledge and the dissemination of that information to the public. The second is the training of our future generation of lawyers and, what they're going to learn and who they're going to be and where they're going to go. In both of those areas, women's voices are being lost and are lost rapidly, quickly, and dramatically. Just a quick example, because I know people like statistics, we're seeing that while women's research and activities in the field are just plummeting, we're seeing that men's production has risen, right? So if you look at just papers submitted over the last year, men have submitted almost 50% more papers than they did in the year before. The drop is between 20 and 50%. So the gap is just, accelerating quite widely. So what does this mean? It means that with all of these things happening in a global pandemic, men had the freedom to work, produce knowledge, go out there and fight these legal battles and change legal thought, while women were just taking care of everything, right? And dropping out of
Holding down the fort.
Exactly. And, we know that losing women's voices would alter the landscape of legal thought and public discourse. And it's also going to impact the makeup of a profession that's only gotten used to women showing up in, appreciable numbers in the past 30 years. So I also want to note that these effects have hit women of color particularly hard and even more dramatically. Those rates I was talking about the increase versus the decrease, are even more stark. And it's also hit the United States and the legal field in the United States harder than in other developed countries. And we think this is related to a couple of key issues. One is that in the United States, we have deeply entrenched gender stereotypes, which mean that caregiving of all types is considered a woman's job. Second is our socioeconomic structure, which is unique in the developed world in that there's virtually no public support structure for caregivers, right? No maternity leave, no public funding for child care support. This comes on top of the lack of health care. And on top of all of that, we have this third factor, which is the real failure of the United States to address the pandemic in any meaningful way over the past year. So the combination of those three forces means that the legal profession has actually been hit quite hard in the United States. It's been hit harder in many cases than in other developed countries. But all of this is going to have ripple effects, as I said, in terms of who becomes a lawyer, what issues we believe are worthy of legal analysis or putting legal resources behind. As well as who are going to become the lawyers of our future and what are they going to be able to do. So I wanted to end on just a moment of hope, though. What's different from what caregivers have been facing in the past and what women lawyers have been facing in the past is that the pandemic is pushing all of this into the public realm very, very rapidly, right? It's easy to ignore a decline over time or the slow rates of women entering the profession over time. But when all of this happens in the space of a year, people are starting to pay attention. So my hope is that by raising awareness, we can start a conversation on what to do about it and try and preserve some of these voices before it's too late, before they're lost forever. So I'll end on that note and I'll pass it off to Natalia, who I guess also is coming from the legal education arena.
Thank you, Shirley. And thank you, Andrea and IAngel, for inviting me to this very amazing discussion with such brilliant co-panelists. So regarding the key human rights challenges to advancing gender equity in Colombia, I wanted to particularly talk about Colombia and the fact that we are a country that we tend to have vast legal framework with a myriad of laws that try to, at least on paper, protect women and girls' rights. But in reality, we see that this is rarely enforced in a way that it's actually effective in protecting said rights. And I do believe that one of these key, or one of the crucial problems in this is the fact that the legal framework that relates to human and fundamental rights in Colombia is definitely informed by patriarchal notions of gender. And so, for example, most of the laws that are willing or that are expecting to protect girls tend to portray women and girls as merely victims and practically with no agency, so that by in and of itself prevents them from even entering or accessing decision-making spaces and processes, which I believe is key to advance gender equity in any scenario. And as well, or similar as it happens in Nigeria, as Stella was mentioning before, cultural and social determinants are also very influencing of this, of how the legal framework is actually put or set into motion within the country. So for example, the very notion of gender may exclude some sections of the population from that same protection that it is aiming to provide. And finally, I just wanted to also highlight the fact that I believe one key challenge in human rights legal framework in general is the lack of research that accounts for girls' rights and the enforcement or lack thereof with this in advancing gender equality. I believe worldwide, but I can particularly talk about Colombia. So Lisette, what are your thoughts on this?
Thank you, Natalia, and thank you to the other panelists and to IAngel for inviting me to speak at this event. And I must say that I concur with some of the comments that were made here. And what I'll do is I'll concentrate on the global level or the international level, which is sort of my area, but I will be zooming into some of the aspects that relate to the legal profession. So in terms of the challenges, I echo what my other panelists were saying with regards to the challenges. Conscious and unconscious bias that lead to the stereotype and prejudice and discrimination against women, discriminatory legislation, gender pay gap, the lack of flexible working, and tackling the double burden of caring duties and professional responsibilities that everybody has mentioned. So with regards to the conscious and unconscious bias, we know that everybody is prejudiced, everybody has some level of bias. And we are hardwired to make implicit association, which result in quick thinking, but it also leads to a stereotyping, prejudice and discrimination. And this is an issue that came out very strongly in the Law Society's 2017-2018 report when we undertook a global survey. And unconscious bias and conscious bias in many jurisdictions still remain one of the biggest issues, one of the biggest challenges for women progressing in their professional career, whether it's the law, whether it is in-house, whether it is sole practitioners, it doesn't matter, it's a real issue. And that is expressed in many different ways, from women actually getting certain type of briefs, for example, in the case of practicing lawyers, to women actually being passed over promotions just because they have care duties, responsibilities. And in terms of discriminatory legislation, we also know that this is one of the most pervasive forms of perpetuating gender discrimination. And in fact, the Women, Business and the Law World Bank report of 2019 suggested that or indicated that women are accorded about 3/4 the number of rights as men in the areas covered by the index. In 2019, no inequalities across gender lines were recorded only in 8 countries, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Latvia, Luxembourg, Iceland, and Sweden. But at the other end of the spectrum, unequal treatment under the law has remained a significant obstacle for women living in the Sudan, in the West Bank, and the Yemen. And that has been confirmed by Estela, that in Nigeria, for example, the property right of many women are still heavily questioned. We also know that in Bangladesh and Pakistan, they received scores of below 49.4%, which means that approximately 180 million women living in these 2 countries have about half the rights of men in the areas covered by the index. And what it has been interesting is that with COVID, we have noticed that the tackling of the double burden of caring duties and professional responsibilities is even more significant to ensure women's participation, not only in politics or in economics, but also in the professional and social aspect. And I just want to end by saying that, mentioning a very interesting case that came out from China only in February, where the China court ordered a man to pay wife for housework in a landmark case. And this ruling has been absolutely fantastic because according to the new civil code in China, which came to effect this year, a spouse is entitled to seek compensation in a divorce if he or she bears most responsibility in child raising, caring for elderly relatives, and assisting partners in their work. And this sort of interesting case has created a lot of debates internally in China, which I'm sure that there are going to be other legal scholars around the world exploring all those different avenues. I think this is when the law actually can help to prevent more discrimination and acknowledge the significant role that women actually play in society, not just in terms of the professional side of things, but also in terms of the caring responsibility. And hopefully, one day we will see that level of parity or acknowledgement will be recognized. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lizette. That's quite interesting. I appreciate that you ended on something a little bit hopeful, because we all know that living in the patriarchal society and dealing with the dual burdens of caregiving and professional responsibility is difficult. So that leads me to my next question, which is going to be first directed to Natalia. What are some of the key obstacles that you or your organization have encountered to achieving a world free from violence, stigma, and stereotypes? And how have these obstacles been exacerbated by the coronavirus pandemic?
Thank you, Andrea, for that question. So one key obstacle that I believe prevents from achieving a world free from violence and stigma, and that has been particularly exposed by the COVID-19 pandemic, is the lack of data and information that truly applies a gender and intersectional lens to inform lawmaking processes. I believe that intersectional frameworks allow to reveal gaps in legislation that may not be readily identified by lawmakers or the society in general. And the failure to include this gender lens reinforces gender stereotypes and obscures intersecting discriminations by ultimately not addressing the root causes of gender inequality. And I think that the COVID-19 response measures showed how this lack of gender lens could prevent from advancing gender equality in different spaces. So for example, in Colombia, we have the case of migrants, women from Venezuela, who came to the country in recent years to improve their socioeconomic conditions, but who faced a myriad of challenges by entering Colombia. And for example, in the particular case of women, they are facing discrimination of on both on the basis of their gender, but also on their status as migrants. So as my co-panelists have already mentioned, like caretaking responsibilities tend to rely exclusively on women. So they have to take care of their children or other family members. But other times they also are like come to the country all by themselves and are so exposed to gender-based violence and having no safety net to turn to makes it even harder for them to even like file a report or something like that to the authorities. But in addition to that, I think we all know that women in general tend to earn less than their male counterparts, and women tend to secure less or more low-paying jobs, and that is no different in this scenario. So women from Venezuela in Colombia tend to rely on the informal economy. And this ultimately means that they have no or poor access to health services or to social security in general. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, this, I believe, was exacerbated. And the fact that the Colombian government did not take into consideration these pre-existing inequalities only helped further them. So for example, when the Colombian government issued measures to switch to online forums, there was like the problem, like women couldn't even like go to work, given that they work in the informal economy rather than in something like more formal, or they also have to like take like double or more shifts, like their work, like whenever they were able to do it, on top of child caring. But in addition to that, with this particular section of an already marginalized population, the fact that most of them live in poverty and don't even have access to internet or electronic devices to even access that online world, so it makes them even harder for them to secure any sort of livelihood. Additionally, lockdown measures also, we all know, hit the informal economy harder, and there wasn't like any particular actions directed towards coping with this issue. And these quarantine measures are also, and as I think we all also know, ended up trapping women in home with their abusers. But in the particular case of Colombia, it was also the fact that most of these women did not even have a home where to quarantine, or they ended up in overcrowded spaces where no social distancing was even possible to comply with. So I am confident that if the Colombian government would have actually implemented a gender and intersectional lens, it would have, like, the measures that were adopted would have been able to protect all sectors of the population, especially marginalized ones. So yeah, so I don't know, Stella, do you have any thoughts on this matter?
Yeah, I'll say again, like most of the panelists had said earlier on, the COVID actually brought a new dimension into our system. Before the COVID, whenever you talk about violence against women, I did say initially that we have a law on violence against women. It was always taken like a joke and was not fully actually implemented. You hardly get anybody punished for violating the wife. In particular, I'm using husband and wife issue. But with the COVID, the issue of domestic violence actually came to the forefront. There were so much violations that between March and end of June, when Nigeria had their lockdown, recorded cases came to 3,600 in Nigeria. And this was across the board. They found out that every state had up to 100 recorded. And this is just the recorded ones. There were lots that were not recorded. And there were actually some unfortunate ones where young girls were raped and killed. So it made domestic violence issue or violence against women and brought it more to the forefront. And there has been so much push now for strict penalty on those who violate the women, whether domestic, whether in home front or even in outside their homes. And out of the 3,600 recorded cases, it was also found out that 95% of those violated were women and girl children. And they were raped by basically their family members. What happened was during the lockdown, unlike some of the advanced countries, the government provided incentive that helped cushion the effect. But in our setting, even the food items that were meant to be delivered to those who were quarantined were hoarded by those in authority. And there was no money, there was no food, and you lock people up. Of course, there were bound to be friction. So the issue of domestic violence went astronomically high during the COVID, and it has reinforced the law. I think a lot of people are being prosecuted now for violence against women. And secondly, when we talk about gender, we must be thinking of how to strengthen pro bono lawyers. The economy is so hard hit. It also affects lawyers here. And so many lawyers are not willing to take up cases. They are not going to be paid until they win the case. And in most cases, what we are looking for in gender cases are not really to be paid, but to make a point and to bring out the law to the forefront. So, but when lawyers are busy looking for means to feed themselves or feed their families, it becomes a difficult thing. So there is absolute need for us to encourage pro bono lawyers by funding, and also to look into the issue of awareness creation. You can't have laws and people do not know they have the law. That is one of the greatest problems we have. There is need for sensitization in our system. There is urgency too to find ways of encouraging women to be more productive, no matter what their husbands do, because they seem to relax a lot. But now the new generation have understood that a man could fend for the family as well as the woman. Whoever has a better education or better job can do it. That is why I'm still hoping that within the next 20 years, it will be a different ballgame. If not in the Western world, I think in Nigeria, a lot of our women will be well educated and will really go up to measure up with the men. And all this issue of violence will reduce. And when people know they are right, they will take it up. The problem we have at the moment is getting them to know that these laws are there to protect them. And they should be willing to come out for us to take up the perpetrators. I think, what do people think, the rest of the panel? I think maybe one of you could comment on it too.
If I may, Stella, I concur with what you and Natalia have highlighted with regards to the impact of COVID on gender-based violence. And it was a very sad reminder of the long way to go in achieving greater gender equality in society as a whole. And the recent wave of domestic violence showcases that. I also echo your concerns with regards to the lockdown measures. It has made it even more difficult for women to get away from their perpetrators, leaving many trapped in an increasing volatile situation. In the UK alone in 2020, the numbers were very telling. Calls to the National Domestic Helpline increased by around 66%. Calls to the NSPCC helpline, which is a child line, about the impact of abuse on children increased by 32%. The Metropolitan Police reported making 100 domestic violence arrests a day. And these incidents show that the policy of isolation and confinement has increased the levels and the reporting. So it is what many policymakers have called the silent pandemic. And the Law Society has been very active on this front. We, for example, in 2020, we released a report calling for a renewed legal aid increase following the publication of these statistics. And we also we were calling for non-mean tested legal aid to be made available for domestic abuse victims. A statistic from the Ministry of Justice also show a steep increase in the number of domestic violence remedy orders application between July and September last year. So in general, we know that the police forces have been using a power to release alleged perpetrators without bail conditions. And that is very dangerous indeed. So in terms of gender-based violence, we certainly have a big task in our hands. And I think the role of lawyers in providing legal aid support to many victims is going to be key in the next few months, if not years. On the other hand, we also have a few wins in terms of the COVID pandemics, if there are any wins, but we have to look at the positives, I suppose. And it's the flexible working aspect of it. I think COVID have demonstrated that it is possible to work from home for many professional women have not had access to flexible working practices, even though they've been calling to have that for years in order to be able to balance care responsibilities with professional development. And in a way, this reasserts that the workplace needs to change in order to accommodate the need for women. And I think flexible working is going to be one of the few examples coming after COVID where employers have to recognize that they need to manage the workforce differently, and they need to integrate good practices in the workplaces in order to retain their female talent. And this is something that we need to continue fighting for. Thank you. I don't know if somebody else would like to say a few words about this. Sorry.
I think we're going to probably move on to our next question, but I wanted to just echo some of your sentiments, Lizette, about flexible working places, allowing more women and girls to participate in work. However, on the other side of that, obviously, with the increased caregiving responsibilities, women who are now whose employers are allowing them to work from home, are also having to raise children and teach children at the same time, which makes it very difficult. And in addition, many of us are privileged to be able to work remotely, as Natalia noted, there are lots of women and girls who are unable to do so and are in marginalized places. So we have a lot of obstacles to overcome. And that is a good segue into the next question, which is with respect to the issues that we've been identifying. What have you or your organization done to address them and to move toward a world free from gender inequities? So Nancy, why don't you start us off with that one?
Thanks, Andrea. I want to echo and agree with the comments of my panelists about some of these challenges and kind of this sense that in recent years we have been going backwards. I noted that the World Economic Forum's report on gender equity, gender parity in 2020 said that at the rate we're going, it's 99 and a half years before the world reaches parity. That's longer than any of us shall live. So I think we have to keep in mind that our work is, we are building a framework. We are developing resiliency because we are in a long battle. To have that resiliency and to build the power to sustain it, IAngel has been building a global network of lawyers who will donate their time and their minds and their skills to addressing these key gender equality challenges. In order that's a way to strengthen these efforts globally. As Andrea noted at the outset, we do this through education, advocacy, and engagement. But I wanted to put some flesh on those bones and really explain sort of the how and the why. The education component, of course, is key. Part of what we need to do is educate ourselves and our communities about the key challenges that women face and the obstacles, both in our countries and in other countries. So IAngel has been pleased to host programs featuring leading academics like Shruti or journalists, women's rights lawyers from other countries, from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe, to talk about the special challenges in those countries for women and to talk about the work that the NGOs and activists are doing to confront those challenges. That kind of education serves purpose in multiple levels. Of course, it's helpful to learn about other countries and to learn about challenges. It's a sad reality that many in the legal community in which we practice live their lives and just kind of blissfully unaware of the grave injustices that are occurring around the world. So the first challenge is really raising awareness and getting people to understand what the issues are. And when we find that when we raise that awareness, that generates more interest in providing assistance. People hear about the problem and they say, okay, I didn't know that. How can I get involved? And that generates volunteer lawyers, more resources, more time, more brain power, more strategic thinking to be deployed on these issues. I think another part of the educational component of our program is assisting NGOs and activists with considering how volunteer lawyers can help them advance their work and increase their own effectiveness. We find that many NGOs, they have their hands full dealing with the problems on the ground, terrible gender bias, domestic violence, inequality, poverty, and they don't know that there are volunteer legal resources available. They don't have time to think about how those resources might be deployed or how to access them. So part of what we do is getting the word out to those activists around the world that we're here and that we are a resource. So while everyone else is making demands on them, we are saying, how can we help? And working with them to to help them do more with less. So that's an important part of making really lasting changes to promote equality. Advocacy is another key part of our advancing our mission, and the advocacy takes many forms. Andrea mentioned signing on to coalition advocacy pieces. We join with other organizations. We sign on to amicus briefs on cases that have wide-ranging impact on the rights of women and girls. But we also use our power as lawyers. We're advocates, and simply amplifying voices and can have a tremendous impact. I remember a few years ago, the former dictator of Chad was being tried on human rights violations in the Human Rights Court in Senegal. And we were notified by our network that the court had decided that they didn't want to hear from the survivors of sexual violence in the courtroom. And those women wanted to be heard, and it was important that they be heard. And emails went out around the world, you know, Senegal, California, Sweden, UK, and a letter was produced urging the court in Senegal to allow the survivors to be heard. And they were heard, and they were allowed to testify. And it made a huge difference. And it was, you know, it was made possible by the global network that we create when we connect with each other. Another key example of the use of advocacy, where you might not think what could an organization like IAngel do to affect change in another country. But we have worked with Wogi and Stella on multiple occasions where Stella and her organization would be advocating, be it for women's rights or a particular widows' rights on a particular issue. And it's important to the local authorities to know that the global community is watching. So we take our lead from the activists on the ground, and if we are asked to assist, we can send a letter and say, you know, we've been advised by our sister organization of this problem. It's a serious problem. The international community is watching, and we hope you will pay attention when our advocate speaks. And we have found that is effective. The third aspect of this work is really building the engagement, getting so many lawyers who want to make a difference to have the experience of getting involved in this work, both to increase strategic thinking, to provide resources, but also really to strengthen the movement going forward. It is a hard thing to sustain change. It is a hard thing to stay active and find motivation to get out of your comfort zone and to do something that you haven't done before. But we have found that if you give people the opportunity to get involved in this work, that they want to do more. I have found in my own life that working with international women lawyers from many different countries, activists, feminists working on these issues, it's really inspiring. It is a unique opportunity. You find that we have far more in common than we have differences. And when we work together in that way, we inspire each other and pull each other up when we face the setbacks that come our way. You know, we know that the path to equality is not a straight line. It never has been a straight line. It's marked with zigs and zags. We hope for steady progress, but when you're right there in the moment, it's often not like that. We have to steel ourselves for the long haul. And a really wonderful way to do that is to work with each other and find the common ground to do that. So that's how IAngel advances that goal. Stella, what's your comment on that? We've worked together on some of these things.
Yeah, like Nancy rightly said, I don't think we would have achieved a lot without IAngel this year, because most of our important cases needed a more serious backing. Within the system, we have so many NGOs. And so when NGOs try to intervene in certain cases, they just see you as a meddler and as a troublemaker. And they don't take most of us seriously. But when you push and then they find out that you have a foreign backing, then they now sit up. And IAngel came up with the letter that really saved the day, where the lady, the consultant that was defamed, they libeled against her to get her out of the seat. And as soon as IAngel wrote that letter, the Senate Committee on Privileges, where the letter that took the lady off her seat emanated from, took it seriously. When we wrote him before IAngel wrote their own letter, they just sat on it. But as soon as we got my letter, attaching IAngel's letter to them, they sat up. And they had to convene a hearing on the matter. So you cannot really overlook the importance of international collaboration with the local NGOs in everything we do. And we also had another case of a woman who was also, there was an interview at Open University Commission. And this lady was the most qualified and was the next in line to take the seat. They decided to conduct interview instead of following the normal pattern of the senior or the next in line to take the position. They conducted an interview. This woman came first at the interview. They canceled the first interview. They had a second interview. She came first, second interview. The third interview, she came first. They stopped the interview. We wrote them and said, we're still waiting. Instead of them to appoint the lady, they swept it under the table. We had to also involve another international agency and say, please, can you write these people and ask what is going on? And when they did, before they could even get the letter, they had appointed a man on that seat. The case is still on now. So it is extremely, I don't know how far we can go in our own local setting with some of the gender problems we have in terms of when it comes to the high level or the high class, where you think things are normal, the rich cry too. So without foreign collaboration, it will be more difficult for us to make any reasonable headway. So, and in our local setting, also you remember clearly when we had the widow who was chased out of her house for infidelity. Infidelity to who? A dead husband of over 30 years. It was when IAngel sent their letter and we confronted the State House of Assembly. They now had to call all the leaders in the community, in the whole community. And after calling the leaders, the lady was reinstated, not only reinstated, she was also now given financial backing to set her up. So you can see what collaboration means. I don't know what we could have achieved on our own as WOGI if we had not had IAngel backing us. So there is this absolute need for this international collaboration. And WOGI cannot thank IAngel enough. We have our other local programs we really do. And like we found out that at the rural setting, the women really suffer a lot. And they suffer because they are economically not empowered. And so we designed a program where we have economic empowerment program through a revolving loan scheme. So we now have a seed money. We gather them together because it works perfectly well when you have the women who know themselves within a community setting. Seed money. This seed money we put up, it may not be more than $250 or let's say $500 into their purse. And then they keep borrowing that money to do one little trade or the other. But you must have a trade in your, you must have shown them that this is what you want to do, and you give us a projection what you can do with that money, and then you take the loan. When you take the loan, you're giving it for only a month or 3 months maximum. Within 3 months, you must have made enough profit to start standing on your own. But if you haven't, we'll allow you to take another 3 months. Then you return the capital. Somebody else who is on the queue will now take the money and start off again. This is one way WOGI is encouraging the women at the rural setting. The way things are going, actually, I must tell you that there has been a remarkable improvement in gender equality awareness.
I think we
have a
I think
frozen.
Stella lost her connectivity for a moment.
Oh, okay, that's good.
Okay.
Thank you.
But
Thanks so much
Andrea,
for sharing with
maybe
us.
other people can chip in because I see we're having problems.
Yeah. So thanks so much for sharing that with us, Stella. It's really amazing the things that WOGI has been able to do. And IAngel is so proud to be able to collaborate with you and other international organizations. So I would like to actually move on to the next question, which is, what do you see as, and some of this was answered already by Stella and Nancy, but what do you see as the most effective ways that pro bono or volunteer lawyers can engage with these efforts to, and where do you see the greatest need for legal services? And this question is directed to you, Lisette.
Thank you, Andrea. You're absolutely right. I think Nancy and Stella began the conversation about this very beautifully. So thank you very much for doing a fantastic preemptive intervention there. And what Nancy and Stella were showcasing is that the legal profession can be a force for good and in taking a leadership role in addressing gender equality using that set of diverse skills. I think the legal profession needs to take gender equality more seriously, not only outside, but only from within. And in that regards, the Law Society of England and Wales is taking its role on addressing this issue very seriously, not only domestically, but also internationally. At domestic level, what we have done is to conduct a series of research in order to gather all the evidence needed to continue backing the business case for women in law, especially for those women achieving positions of leadership, which is still far low than where it should be. So we also been designing methodological tools in order to engage male champion for change within the legal profession, because we know that how things stand men still are, in most cases, power holders. And so we need to convince and persuade our male colleagues to come on board, because only jointly we can actually we are able to make those transformative changes at a quicker pace. I'm not sure that I want to wait another 99 years, Nancy. So thank you for sharing that statistics. It's quite depressing otherwise. And in that regards, what we have done is basically in 5 different areas. So we've done a lot of research. And from the research that we have found that there are many jurisdictions, especially with regards to the legal profession, where there is not available data. And I think in that regards, all the legal practitioners, as well as the local bar association or national bar association, can play a big role in actually increasing that level of statistics so that we have the evidence to continue the fight for gender equality. The second aspect is what you were talking about, Nancy, which is advocacy. Advocacy is absolutely paramount in order to increase the invisibility that many women actually have been facing for centuries. And in that regard, what we've been doing is trying to support lawyers and judges that are facing threats of intimidation in the exercise of their professional duties as lawyers with letters of support. So, for example, we've sent letters on behalf of Nasrin Sotoudeh, the Iranian human rights lawyer, who has been incarcerated for many years, precisely when trying to represent women activists in Iran. So, just recently, she spoke at an event organized by the Law Society shortly after she was released because she had COVID. You know, it's one of those instances where COVID and imprisonment of women activists has come to the fore. The second campaign that we ran very recently it was on behalf of 2 Turkish lawyers. One of them was Ebru Timtik. She was a Turkish human rights lawyer who was imprisoned in Turkey, and she was fighting for to have a fair trial. And unfortunately, she died of a death. She was fasting for her release and to get a fair trial. And unfortunately, that is the sad reminder that unless we do something seriously about these women activists, there are going to be serious consequences at the end. We have now the Law Society, alongside other international bar associations, have set up a fair trial day in order to commemorate this brave woman. We also been supporting capacity building projects and more in particular research projects in different jurisdictions to zoom into the situation of women lawyers in different jurisdictions. And we are supporting that effort, and we will be supporting that effort in the years to come. That data is extremely important. Another important aspect in terms of sharing is best practices. There are obviously standards are, we do not want to standardize. What we are trying to find is best practices that can help to tackle the problem and can be adjusted in order to reflect different contexts and different jurisdictions. But I think continue obviously building and generating a global sisterhood. And the last but not least is a strong leadership. The Law Society had between 2018 and 2019 a very strong female president. She was the 5th. Her name is Christina Blacklows. And under her leadership, we were able to do a lot during her presidential year. And since then, we have the 6th and the 7th female presidents that are coming up in 2021 and this year and next year. And it was thanks to all those efforts, to those unified efforts, that we were able to make strides and to position women in a more visible manner. So I think that's my lot. Of course, I welcome any question, but I would like to hand over to any other who would like to make a comment on this. I'm quite keen to see your experiences as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisette. We actually are running short on time, so I am going to just present one more question to Shruti, and then Natalia can respond to it. And then we'll open up for questions if we have a few minutes at the end. If people can post their questions in the chat, we'd be happy to spend a few minutes answering them. And so the next question that I am posing to Shruti is, are there other interventions to gender equity that you believe would be effective in addressing these issues, specifically that we've discussed: gender-based violence, partner violence, all violence against women in general? Is there a greater need for advocacy or social service interventions that can make lawyers more effective in your area of work? Shruti, go ahead.
Sure. So what I thought I would do is give a little bit of a gender lens to the US pro bono system and then connect that to international pro bono work. So just briefly, to understand the role of pro bono in the US legal system, I think it's really important to understand that the only place that you're really guaranteed a lawyer in the US system is in the criminal defense system. There's some additional exceptions for children, but that's basically it. So what that means is that the areas where the realities of women's lives are concentrated, so when you're talking about family law, employment law, immigration law, things like that, there's very little legal help available, particularly if somebody has any back barriers to access. And this really shapes the whole field in terms of what is the prestigious thing to do, not where the resources are and not. The other thing that, and I think part of this, a related issue, if we were relate this to international pro bono work, is that U.S. lawyers are given very little, if any at all, training in international law, and so they're not aware of these sort of broad scope of interventions that Lisette and Stella were talking about, and the best practices that are emerging in other areas of the world. And I saw a question, for example, in the text, kind of covering the differences between equity and equality. And that's something that I think most US lawyers are not aware of, and haven't seen how the equity term has been hijacked by right-wing forces, globally. And, that's just an example of things of, I think, how what's happening on the transnational sphere often is not reflected in what's going on in the United States. So that's all a way to encourage, I think, two types of interventions. The first is to focus on broader ways to meet clients' needs, because the legal system might not be doing that, right? And we see this in other countries. Both Lisette, Stella, and Natalia have all been speaking about different interventions, community-based interventions, to things like, violence in the family, modifying family laws. We're seeing all these really creative things come out in the pandemic in other countries where people are able to do virtual hearings, virtual protective orders, things like that, where people are able to balance childcare both with being a lawyer, but also with being a client, right? Being able to attend legal hearings and things where childcare is available or able to bring their children. The last thing I would say is that I think it's really important to change the culture, both around pro bono itself, but the culture that addresses the culture that sort of focuses on the legal system in terms of solutions to changes. And just two quick examples are, we've seen in recent years how both the Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter movement have succeeded in really changing what the law was unable to do, right? They've changed the underlying patriarchal attitudes, the underlying gender stereotypes that were preventing many women from, being able to participate in public life, but then also from being able to turn to the courts for, for accountability or to address what was happening to them. So just all a way to say that we need to look more broadly, and both in terms of internationally versus domestically, but also to look outside the court systems and sort of traditional methods of access to justice to really address the issues and problems that women are facing.
Natalia, did you want to spend a few minutes answering that question?
Sure, yes. I totally agree with what Shruti just mentioned. And just to add a little bit on that, like, one thing that I think is important for pro bono lawyers to engage with is a deep understanding of the legal history and context of whatever task they are taking on. So in a way that we truly understand how the laws work within the country and in a broader international level as well, but also being mindful of the social and cultural drivers of gender inequality and gender violence in a way that we can provide a better answer to root causes of each of these issues. And I also believe that kind of like reframing the importance of pro bono work is crucial. And I think this is something that both pro bono lawyers and law firms in general should address, just like thinking more of this as service-oriented work rather than just a quote unquote work for free type of work. And I believe here is where IAngels work is very crucial. And for example, the project that I'm currently helping IAngel with, which is the Girls' Rights Project. And it's, I believe it's a good example of how we can undertake all these challenges together to advance gender equality. This project is a comprehensive research project that aims to understand how the legal framework of 3 different regions of the world deals with issues of reproductive and sexual rights, child marriage, and female genital mutilations, but also aiming to understand how cultural realities play and influence all these, any legal efforts or legal reforms that may be pushed forward to advance gender equality in each of those regions and countries. The final goal of this research, is to provide a tool precisely for pro bono lawyers all over the world to be able to apply a truly intersectional and gender lens to any efforts that may be advanced. And one benefit that I personally think is key that with this project is the fact that it's currently being conducted by international LLM students. So this project is allowing these like young pro bono professionals to engage with gender equity issues and how these issues may interplay with other areas of the law. So I do think this particular project is highly relevant for all the work that we are currently trying to pursue. I don't know if anyone else have anything to add. Or
can I say one thing?
I would. Go ahead.
I want to use this opportunity to also see whether I can, UN should, through the CSW, should be able to make states that ratify laws. When countries ratify laws, they should be wholly responsible to ensure that the laws are domesticated. That is a very major problem we have in our setting. Laws are ratified very easily when they come to UN. They bring them home. Is law at the federal level, but is not practicable at the state level until they are domesticated. So the UN through the CSW should be able to go through the ministers for women affairs of those states. They attend CSW meetings. They should be able to make them, hold them responsible for the domestication of the laws so that it can be practicable. We can enforce laws. You don't just ratify and go away. That is my last chip in, which is very crucial because that's one of the setbacks we have in our system. We can't enforce the law because it has not been domesticated. Thank you.
I just have a quick comment, both in response to Shruti's and Natalia's comment on reframing the pro bono paradigm. So important because indeed pro bono assistance, at least from US law firms, has been a very narrow concept where the first question is who is the client? And it's very much oriented to what law firms have coverage for and sort of the attorney-client relationship in a traditional sense. And IAngel has been sort of expanding this definition to help law firms and lawyers and law schools realize that lawyers can provide assistance in a whole array of circumstances beyond just this traditional attorney-client concept. They can provide regional legal research. They can provide global legal research. They can provide intersectional strategic analysis. And those kinds of projects can really drive change in a much more dramatic way than just dealing with individual attorney-client, one client, one attorney kinds of relationships. So that it provides a platform for much more engagement of lawyers in the work of promoting equality globally.
Yes, I would like to say that I completely echo what Shruti, Natalia, and Nancy has said. I think the relevance of pro bono in this particular situation can be quite transformative. And so changing the service-oriented into a service-oriented sort of system rather than something that, if you have the time, may change the mindsets about how we approach different issues. And on that, I just want to draw your attention to a recent report that the Law Society released. It was a year-long research supported by a UK, an international firm called Batewells. And basically we embarked into that journey a year ago with the aim at putting together a toolkit for women around the globe with best practices, some tips on how to set up women's chapter in their own firms and other things. And that particular exercise would not have been possible without their support. And we had a group of volunteers, lawyers, as well as a partner involved in the research. And we just launched it on the 8th of March. And that is a fantastic piece of resource. And there are other firms in the UK providing similar background, similar information. So for example, there is an international firm called Simmons & Simmons who provided a high level of support into creating a toolkit for business and human rights for civil society organizations, supporting directly an organization called Peace Brigades International. So as you can see, the level of pro bono support, as Nancy was rightly saying, can go beyond that just a client to firm relationship, and is far more conducive to make those transformative changes that I was talking about. And just one last point is the role of the lawyer in reviewing and changing discriminatory laws, the ones that Stella was talking about. I think we have a big role to play in supporting other jurisdictions and our own probably in updating outdated laws, legislation. We still have many jurisdictions that have laws that are ancient. We need to make sure that there are new and modern legislation so that they don't affect or discriminate against women or beyond. Thank you.
I just wanted to jump in and add a really quick example to build off of what Lizette was saying. But just recently, I've been involved in a pro bono effort to address the rising rate of hate crimes and racism against Asian Americans in the United States, and particularly here in Indiana, where we're located. And one of the biggest things that we did was expressly refrain from calling for increased policing or incarceration as a response, because that, would fall upon minority communities the hardest, and the Black community the hardest of all. And that enabled us to build coalitions that we wouldn't have been able to build otherwise. But also, we were also able to point to, again, decades of research that show what does really make a difference are having civil rights commissions, which can increase accountability and raise awareness and reduce segregation, as well as leadership that has integrity, right? If leaders refrain from scapegoating people, the people who follow them will do the same, right? Those are interventions that are somewhat legal in nature, but actually create much more far-reaching change than just taking somebody to court would have.
Thank you so much. Nancy, did you want to mention something? I saw you unmuted yourself before I close out.
Well, I saw someone in in the chat asked how do they connect with iAngels. So we're iangel.org, www.iangel.org. You can email Andrea or at Andrea at iangel.org or Nancy at iangel.org, or reach out, connect with us. We'd like to hear from you. Join our advocacy newsletter and let's get started.
Yes.
I also had a technically, does this platform like eject us at 11 or can we stay on to answer questions?
We can stay on for a few minutes. I think the platform will automatically close at 10 after. Maybe I think that's what it's set for. So we have about
let's
9
take
minutes.
questions.
If anybody has some more questions, I think we answered the question about equity versus equality and but if anybody wants to jump in on that. So there's let's see, I'm going to read this question that was just popped in. Pramila says, I work for a gender-based violence organization where we have a program that matches frontline workers with mainly female pro bono legal students to invest in the skills of new lawyers to understand gender-based violence issues, intersectionality, and trauma-informed lawyering, which is so needed for our clients. Having seen the impact this makes, I am shocked to hear some of these statistics on female lawyers and legal researchers during the pandemic. Is there anything frontline organizations can do to support in this? Who wants to take that one?
I just
sorry. Go on, Trudy.
I just wanted to say that universities are really at least aware of the problem, and we're trying really hard to push them to actually address it. So I just put my email address up there if anybody was interested in reaching out about that. I can share that with my various networks as well as the work that we're doing at IU, at Indiana University in particular. Lizette, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
Not at all, and I agree with you, Shruti. I think a good partnership between different organizations bring different levels of skills and expertise as well as analysis. So I think partnerships is so key in terms of building up not only the networks but also the expertise and the data that is necessary on this discussion. And in terms of the question itself, you can actually help by getting involved. I mean, when we had the campaign about Ebru Timtik, the Turkish human rights lawyers, we contacted many different organizations, including Amnesty International, Peace Brigades International, in order to highlight the plight of female lawyers in other jurisdictions. The amount of work that they do and the risks that they face in some jurisdictions where there are authoritarian regimes is absolutely unbelievable. And we have heard feedback that just by getting letters or by highlighting their plight can help them to feel motivated and to continue going. Sometimes, obviously, their situation can be unsustainable. So by getting that solidarity and that sisterhood that I was referring before, it can be it can help with the morale as well as raising awareness and the visibility of the issue. So just get involved.
Thank you. Selma actually said, I'm not sure I got the answer as to why you prefer using equity. Nancy, do you want to
I can field that one.
Yeah.
Well, we use both terms in our organization. I think we probably use equality more often than equity. In our name, I confess that when I formed the organization, I thought that our name was already kind of long and unwieldy, and equity has 3 syllables and equality has 4. So that's it. I know there are levels of analysis with those terms, but as a practical matter, just for the name, we use IAngel for the shorthand anyway. There are different concepts, both valid. I've read the debate about the use of the two terms. And in some contexts, equity, I think, is more powerful, and in other contexts, equality is. But I think we're all working for a fairer world and a juster world. And that's the explanation on the name.
Thank you. I
Can I
think
chip in something?
I agree with you that
Just
it is
brief.
different. I'm sorry, did you want to go, Stella?
Yeah, I wanted to say something about the equity. The world equity is more favorable in our own system back here in Nigeria. When you talk about equality, the men are very hostile. But if you use the word equity, they seem to understand it, and they give you an open arena to do whatever you want to do. Once you talk about equity, they understand that you are looking for balancing. But when you talk of equality, they see you confronting them, and they think is a challenge between men and women. So the term equity seems to be more amenable here in our system than equality. That's just what I wanted to point out.
Very interesting. I kind of see in the that equity is useful, as Nancy said, in some contexts, while equality is useful in others. I really think that gender equity is more all-encompassing, whereas equality is really about, we want to be exactly on the same level. And in some contexts, specifically when we're looking at affirmative action issues, the equality argument can backfire. But if we say, you know, we actually, to get to equality, we need to be raised up and we need equity so that we can, we need more affirmative action rather than less to allow us to reach equality, because otherwise we're not going to get to equality for long past my lifetime.
Yeah, just one very small comment. In the case of the Law Society of England and Wales, we use equality, and that's something that we basically promote everywhere. We have heard from the research that we have done, as Stella pointed out, that in some jurisdictions, the issue of gender equity is seen as less contentious than the issue of gender equality. I can imagine that, as Stella referred to, for tactical issues, some women movements use equity rather than equality. But what we are arguing for as an organization, and what I have seen of the work that IAngel has done, is more towards that gender equality that the person was referring to. Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree. We're all, and as Nancy said, we're all in it we're all in it in the end to be equal and to have gender equality for all genders. But in our patriarchal society, it's very difficult for women and girls right now. And that's what we're all about. So we're going to be closing out, I think, in 2 minutes. So I don't miss the opportunity to thank all of the panelists. I want to do so. I really appreciate you all giving your time. And I want to thank the attendees for their engagement and listening to us. And we'd love to continue this conversation and have input from anybody who is willing to join our fight for gender equality. So check us out at iangel.org, and you can email me at andrea@iangel.org. And if anybody else wants to say something in closing, go ahead. I think we have about a minute before we get shut down.
Thank you all for a wonderful discussion.
Thank you. Hello.
Yeah, it was wonderful. So it was especially wonderful to have people joining us from across the globe and around the country.
Multiple continents.
Yes. The UK, Nigeria, Then we got in the US, we got Indiana, San Francisco, Alameda, and Natalia, you're on the peninsula somewhere, right?
I am, but also representing Colombia.
Yeah. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and close this out and end the webinar, and we really appreciate your attendance. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.